Hello and welcome back to our breakdown of Carl Jung's The Red Book. We're on chapter 3 on the service of the soul. In the previous chapters, Jung came back to his soul, and what he found there really disturbed him. He found meaninglessness in the depths, and he found unbridled desire, the things in life that we really try to avoid as much as possible. So Jung is going to continue, and now he's trying to come to terms with going into the depths. As scared as Jung may be, it is into the depths that his soul wants to lead him. So even though he's hesitant, he knows this is where he must go. So the chapter begins with Jung writing down all of his dreams as best he can remember. And the reason he's doing this is because he's not sure. He just feels like this is what he needs to be doing. This is very brave, to just go into something and knowing you're being led somewhere into the depths of despair and unregulated desire, and you don't know what to do, so you do something. Well, Jung starts writing down his dreams because that's what his intuition led him to do. So we remember previously in the last chapter, Jung has stated that dreams are the words of the soul. Okay? So he's really starting to dive into this now. And he's not sure to what end that he's writing down his dreams. In fact, he even apologizes for questioning that this is what he should be doing at all. And he really emphasizes that he has a small knowledge compared to his soul, who is large and divine and godlike in nature. And so who is he to question is essentially what it comes down to. He says to his soul, "I should give myself completely in your hands. But who are you? I do not trust you." And then he points out that, you know what? Damn, I trust others. I do my best to love and trust other human beings, upstanding citizens, men, women, children, even dogs and animals. I do my best to love them. But my own soul? Not so much. Not so much. And he basically comes to the conclusion that, damn, that's pretty messed up, right? But in honesty, I think that's something that we all struggle with, that we value the opinions of others way above our own. Public perception is everything, and we worry what people will think about us, right? So we do our best to love others, but oftentimes our own self becomes the victim. It's easy. Well, maybe it's not easy, but it's something that we all work really hard to do. Is to appear nice and to work hard to please others. And sometimes that's to our own detriment. And that's something I work with a lot in hypnosis. A lot of my practice is focused on helping people overcome and make the changes that they want. So those things that you feel deep down inside that you really want, those are things that are the soul calling out. They're calling out to you, and they're asking you to make this change. And maybe there is a really strong portion of you that wants to make that change, but you just can't seem to do it. And that's life, It's difficult. If it was easy, we'd all be, walking on heaven on earth, and there wouldn't be any sort of problems. We would all be self-realized and self-actualized, and that would be it. But with hypnosis, that's one of the big things that I love to do, is help people make the change that they really desire and might be having a hard time to make. And the opinions of others can really weigh on a person. When we try to put everyone before ourselves, it can be difficult. And if we were to listen to the outward world, we might not get anything done. So take a moment here and listen to the wise words of St. Louis Blues rookie goaltender Jordan Binnington. When he was asked by Steve Levy after the Cup, after winning Game 7, he was asked, what was it like being fourth on the depth charts, being in the minor leagues, swimming in the seas of despair with no chance ever, and now you're here as a champion. What was the mindset that really took you there? And here's his answer.
Man, everyone, you just gotta believe in yourself.
Well put. Well put. Because at one point or another, it doesn't matter what other people say. You have to look into yourself for that confidence, and you have to listen to your own desires and make your own choices. And indeed, it is a spiritual lesson to say, "F what everybody else thinks. I'm going to figure this out on my own." It's a huge step to put out the worry of society, to have all these things that are berating down on you all the time in your mind, and to just set that aside and ask yourself, where do I stand on this issue? Because that's where self-confidence comes from. Being able tone out the world around you, and to be proud, and to stand firmly in what you believe and where you are. And that is a big step on the way to individuation, to be able to firmly put your 2 feet in the ground and stand tall despite whatever may confront you in your journey. So then there are 3 things that Jung wonders aloud if he must part with, and that's meaning, thought, and self-judgment. Now Jung asks himself, am I to part with meaning? Am I just supposed to walk into the meaninglessness of life, where my soul is apparently trying to drag me along to? What he finds is that the soul is taking him into meaninglessness, because through meaninglessness he may find the supreme meaning. And the supreme meaning comes about when we're able to marry meaning and meaninglessness. So it's a necessary descent. If half the world is meaning, the other half is meaningless. If half the world is light, the other half is shadow. And so Jung has to set aside meaning and go into the depths to come out the other side. Jung asks if he must set aside thought. He says, I understand I must not think either. Should thought too no longer be? And then that's when he goes into his trust issues. And it seems that instead of giving himself over wholly to his soul, that it's his thinking process that makes him fearful. So instead of just going headlong into the unknown, it's his process of thinking. He's like, well, I don't really know what's down there. It could be snakes and dragons, and who would want to go there, right? So the idea is, well, do I need to get rid of thought? Is thought the impediment here? Is this what's holding me back? Is this what's causing fear? Thinking. Imagine if you were blindfolded and taken out into the middle of the woods, in the middle of the night, on the darkest night of the year, and you were just left there. And maybe you're in a perfectly safe location, but you don't know that. Your thoughts are going to run wild, and there is certainly going to be some fear that comes up, because you don't know what's creeping in those woods around you. What was that sound? And maybe it would be better just to not think at all. But is that even a possibility? It's hard to say. And then the third thing that Jung asks if he needs to get rid of is self-judgment. He says he must learn to love the soul, and so should probably set aside self-judgment. But he's afraid to do so. And what is self-judgment if not thought? It's not like animals have self-judgment. You can maybe see an animal be upset, but they don't think the same way that we do as humans. And so it's our thought about ourselves and our thought and our perspective of what others may be thinking about that causes us fear. We think that we might be doing wrong. And so maybe this is what we need to set aside. Maybe this self-judgment. If we're not going to be able to get rid of thought, maybe we need to be able to get rid of the self-judgment part, which, again, as Jordan Bennington says,
everyone, you just gotta believe in yourself.
Yeah. And so Jung kind of realizes, well, maybe I should get rid of self-judgment. But the problem is, as he states, that he's afraid. And boy, does his soul have something to say about that. It says, this fear testifies against me. And Jung says, yeah, it kind of does, doesn't it? He says that it kills the holy trust between his soul and himself. That fear is the problem. The 3 things, in order for Jung to move forward into the depths, that he thinks that he needs to set aside, is meaning, thought, and self-judgment. That's a whole lot on your plate right up front. So then we move on to the dialogue that is wrote in large print, as you can see here. In the English version that I'm reading from, it's made in italics, but in the facsimile, it's in a larger bold print. And this is, I'm not sure what that indicates, but the whole part written in larger text takes on kind of a different tone. It's almost a little more hyperbolic, a few more juxtapositions thrown out there, a few more blanket statements. It's less of a narrative, and it's almost like he's writing this flowing conversation that he's having with his soul at the time. So let's go through and highlight a few of the main points in this section. The first step towards your soul is into meaninglessness, into eternal disorder, because that is the other half of the world. So if you want to step into the soul, you got to set aside what you know. Another point, your God is a child as long as you are not childlike. And the idea is to marry the ordered with the chaotic, to marry the ordered with the disordered. And that is how you produce the divine child, which is the supreme meaning. Now, what the hell does any of that mean? The child itself is chaotic. The child is wild. It doesn't know social norms. It doesn't know manners. But there's also this future potential within there. This future divine potential. And so, when you're able to bring together order and chaos, you have something that represents the child. Something that you see as potential, but something that is not ruled over by the spirit of the times. Another quote, Christ taught, God is love. But you should know that love is also terrible. Great. Love is terrible now. I thought all I needed was love. It's terrible because you must learn to love what you fear. You must learn to love what horrifies you. And that's what makes love terrible, is that it demands a whole hell of a lot from you. It'd be easy if love was merely to love your family or love your children or love your dog. That's an easy one, right? But no. Love asks you to love your enemy and the things that are in the night ready to get you. It asks you to love the small, the large things that you may not understand. Love asks you to love Donald Trump. It's true. Or Barack Obama, whatever. And then Jung gives us the most disgusting example. Ugh. We must learn such from that saint who was disgusted by the plague infections. She drank the pus of plague boils and became aware that it smelled like roses. The acts of the saint were not in vain. Drank the pus of plague boils. And so I guess that would be the ultimate example of loving something that disgusts and horrifies you. And that's what gets you sainthood. I'm not sure I want to be a saint if that's the case, because that's really gross. Then Jung states that no sacrifice can be too great for you regarding your salvation, regarding receiving mercy. If virtue holds you back, then you must let go of that virtue. And he says, the slave to virtue finds the way as little a slave to vices. And maybe you know some people like this, that even though they're acting out what they think is a virtue, what they think is in the right, it's actually holding them back as a person. I think maybe we all know somebody who's just so kind and so giving. You know, they would do anything for you. And what happens is they become a doormat for people. Whether it's their family or their friends, they get walked all over. And yeah, maybe that's a virtue, but you know what? It might be holding you back as well. Something to think about. Something to think about. And then at the end of this larger text here, it's a very, very interesting statement. If you believe that you are the master of your soul, then become her servant. If you were her servant, then make yourself her master, since she needs to be ruled. These should be your first steps. So the point is, your soul is where you are not, especially if you're making the first step towards it. You must go into the depths. If you are one who is the master of your soul, and you have a tight grip on everything, what you will you have, well, then what you need to do is let go. You need to let go of some things. You need to let go of control, because that's where your learning is. That's where the action is. On the other hand, if you're somebody who's always going with the flow, and just it seems like life just kind of happens to you, well, then you need to grab on, and you need to make some determinations, because you know what? The soul needs its master, and you need to exert some willpower. So it's like there's this fine balance that we need to find to really start onward. We can't just be the guy with the death grip on all the circumstances in your life, but you also can't be somebody who's willy-nilly just floating about. You have to move towards the middle from wherever you stand at. That's the first step towards the soul. This chapter concludes with Jung stating that the next 7 days he swayed between fear, defiance, and nausea. He did not want to listen. He did not want to go into the depths. He was scared, as he stated before. What was this asking of him? He did the only thing that came to his mind, which was write down his dreams. To write down the dreams of earlier. As he stated, dreams are the words of the soul. And so this was the indication he had. This is what his instinct told him, and he went for it. And for 7 days he thought about abandoning ship, and maybe this really isn't for me. And on day 7 the Spirit spoke. It said, look into your depths, pray to your depths, waken the dead. Look into your depths and waken the dead. So what is your basis? What's underneath you? The people that came before, the things, the desires you may be hiding or tucked away. It's time to dive in. And that's where we'll conclude this chapter. Until next time, goodbye.